Well, hello there, 11:15. Thank you guys so much for choosing this service on Daylight Savings. I really appreciate you making space at the other two. Last service was extremely full. The service before that was pretty full, so I'm just really thankful that you guys chose to come to this service. Thank you. And welcome to church if it's your first time. Thanks so much for being here. My hope is that this message, which is from what the people who saw Jesus' life wrote about in the book we call the Bible, is going to be not just encouraging to you, but also I want it to be equipping. I want this time together to help you level up at life. And welcome at all four of our services online as well. And to those of you joining us from the Jasper County Jail Campus, thanks for being here. And this is a place where no matter what happened last week, and no matter what your background is or your rap sheet is, nobody's perfect and everybody's welcome. And we're in this 2-week series called Relational Vampires. It's all about learning to love people who suck the life out of you. It's 2 weeks long. This is part 1. And it's going to be a total to be continued. Because truth is, I started writing my message, and I realized I'm writing next week's message. I got to lay a foundation this week, right? So you got to come back next week. It's going to end with what you want next week. And don't just try church once. I always feel like people do church like they do working out, you know what I mean? And if you worked out 5 times a year, sporadically out, Easter, Christmas, here and there, you're just going to be sore. You're not going to see a difference. But if you work out consistently for 2 months, you're going to get totally shredded. And if you work out spiritually for 1 week, every once in a while, you're going to be sore. But if you work out for 2 months straight, you're going to be spiritually shredded. So I dare you to try Christmas for this, or try church for this season till Christmas. Come regularly till Christmas, and let your kids and family not just experience the fun of church, but the family of church. And I've been here for about 5 years, and let me tell you, this family ain't perfect, but it is wonderful to be a part of. And I think so often we look at our kids, we're like, man, why don't they socialize with more than their phones? It's just dumb. Like, actually meet somebody, go somewhere, do something. Well, set the example. Be here and show them what it looks like to reach out and to connect. Now, today I want to talk about something called relational vampires, and we're going to start by talking about how to identify them this week. Next week, I'm going to come back and talk about how to deliver them. And I know some of you question, why are we talking about vampires in church? It seems kind of dark, seems kind of evil. What's the deal with that? I'll just remind you that Jesus and Paul have a tendency and history of taking secular things and redeeming them. That's just what they do throughout the Bible. And I'll remind you that Christmas is actually just a retread of the Roman holiday Saturnalia, which was full of debauchery and pagan worship and all this stuff. And you know what? Jesus redeemed it. And we don't even think of Saturnalia when we think of Christmas anymore. All you think about is Jesus. And my hope and prayer is someday we're going to look at Halloween and only think of Jesus, which would be cool, and that's what we're doing. We're just doing what they did. So today's message is pretty straightforward. It's one of the simplest messages I've ever written. And we're just talking about a relational vampire, which is really similar to a fictional vampire. Only relational vampires don't suck your blood. They suck the life out of you, right? And I've got 3 simple points that you may recognize. My first thought is relational vampires cannot see their reflection. Number 2, relational vampires can't walk in the light. And number 3, they're not truly alive. And I'm going to explain these points. I'm going to give you a thought on healing vampires. Now, here's the thing. If you ever had a relational vampire in your life, just brief description of what they feel like. Man, you can do lots of good things for them, but it's never enough. You know what I mean? You never satisfy them. You didn't do it right. It's not enough. And if you do something for a relational vampire, they're going to immediately want more. There's no gratitude. It's just, I want more. Relational vampires make you feel like they're personal Kleenex. You know what I mean? They're always blowing their nose into you. They're always, using you to clean up their messes. They're sad. They're angry. They're impossible to please. And they hold you responsible for their personal emotions, which is frustrating. And they just say, hey, look, I'm not looking for that much. I want 100% of your attention 100% of the time. Is that too much to ask, right? If you're not available when they want you, despite your faithfulness in the past, they're going to hold you responsible for their action, for their feelings, and they're going to malign you behind your back. And throughout Jesus' life, the best example of a relational vampire would be the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are actually the traditional authority in Jesus' life. They're politicians, they're pastors, and they're supposed to protect and empower the people of the nation of Israel. But instead of doing that, they sort of dominate and manipulate and control them. Instead of being life givers, they ended up becoming life drainers. And let me read a story from Mark chapter 3, starting at verse 1, that sort of talks about this. It says, Jesus went into the synagogue, which is sort of like a church, sort of like a community center. And it says, and again, he noticed a man with a deformed hand. And since it was a Sabbath, Jesus' enemies watched him closely. Now, the Jews were sort of part of, the best comparison today would be a union. Okay? And I don't think that unions are necessarily bad. I don't think they're necessarily good. I think in the right context, they can be really good. I think in the wrong context, they can be really bad. So all the Jews were part of this union that had sort of become really domineering and controlling for the people of Israel. And they have all these different rules that they enforce. And if you don't follow them, we're going to, excommunicate you from society. We're going to take your pension away. And it's just kind of frustrating. It's keep people out of work, right? So since it was a Sabbath, Jesus' enemies watched him closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath, which is a workplace violation. They're going to shut down the job. It's going to be really bad, okay? Jesus said to the man with the deformed hand, come and stand in front of everyone. And then he turned to his critics and he said, does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is it a day to save life or destroy it? He's looking at these guys. He's like, look, help me help you. We care about people. We want to heal this man. Like there's nothing bad that's going to come out of this. I'm not going to put anyone out of work. I'm not going to do, will you just please let me heal this guy's hand? But they don't want to listen to him. They wouldn't answer. They don't care. They've already made a decision, right? He looked around at them angrily and was saddened by their hard hearts. And he said to the man, hold out your hand. So the man held out his hand, and it was restored. At once the Pharisees went away, and they met with the supporters of Herod to plot how to kill Jesus. There's no gratitude. There's no thankfulness. There's no joy. There's no celebration of somebody who was suffering, being radically healed. I mean, that's a cool moment. But these vampires, man, God gave them these laws to protect the people. And that's what laws are about, right? And as union bosses, it's all about making sure the workplace is safe, making sure that people are paid fair wages. That's good, right? But the Pharisees use these rules to control, subdue, and dominate these people, like an out-of-control OSHA inspector or like an out-of-control building inspector. It's good, but sometimes it can become bad. The Pharisees become total relational vampires. You do good things around them, but they find a way to be mad about it. Have you ever had anyone like that in your life? I mean, we see this all the time, and I'm particularly passionate about this topic because I think we all deal with vampires around us, but also inside of us. I mean, I have become relational vampires many times. Last year, because of a series of emotional events, and also the nights getting longer and the days getting shorter, it's just something I struggle with, I just didn't handle myself very well. And I for sure became a relational vampire, in particular to my wife, but also my family. And I was just grumpy at everybody, like really grumpy. I don't know if you've ever been married to Grumpy, but my wife is married to Grumpy the Dwarf sometimes. And I blame her for my unhappiness. I hold her responsible. It's always her fault. And it's amazing how it just sort of creeps into your life. This is, the relational vampire just sneaks in there into your life. And it's like you don't realize that it happens, but it's just in there. And all of a sudden, you're just biting into everything. You know what I mean? And these are fangs. See that hand? That's what it means, right? And I hope this message will help you see relational vampiring in your own life and around you. And I hope that it will equip you with the tools you need to conquer it. Now let's jump into these points. And I know that a lot of you are like, thank God, Pastor only has 3 points today. Finally, he wrote just a classic 3-point message. Well, I have a lot of sub-points, okay? I'm just going to tell you. I have 3 main points, but I have some sub-points you're going to see. And my first point is really long. The other 2 are not as long, but I'm just warning you in case you're like, oh my goodness, how long is this going to be? The first point's long, but the other ones are short, okay? Now, relational vampires can't see their reflection. That's supposedly, if the vampire is a fiction, look in a mirror, they can't see their reflection. Why? I don't know. But anyway, I think this is really true for relational vampires too. They are so busy seeing other people's faults that they cannot look in the mirror and see their own issues. And it's like, have you seen you? You know what I mean? Have you ever had that like total hypocrite in your life complaining about this thing, And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, do you understand? It's just, but in their own mind's eye, it's everybody else's fault. This is absolutely me last year. And many times when I'm vampire, I'm just fixated on blaming others, and I'm so mad at everyone. I'm the problem. But I'm blaming everyone, And here's the thing, and hopefully this gives you some compassion for relational vampires in your life. Nobody's more miserable than they are. They are the least happy person in the room. Now, there's this old legend. I don't know if it's true or not. Probably isn't. But it's a story about the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, 90,000 tons of diplomacy, right? And the Abraham Lincoln was steaming off the coast of Spain when she and her task force were radioed by a source called A238. A238 said to the Abraham Lincoln and its task force, move your course north by northwest 15 degrees. To which, Abraham Lincoln was like, absolutely not, you move, And they're like, no, you move, argument like that. And eventually the captain of Carrier Strike Force 9 and the supreme commander of Allied NATO forces in the Atlantic Ocean flexed his fingers, got on the radio, and said, this is the USS Abraham Lincoln, second largest ship in the U.S. Navy, accompanied by 5 Ticonderoga-class cruisers and 5 destroyers and 2 nuclear-powered submarines and 15,000 sailors. I will not modify my course. I command you to move your course by 15 degrees north, or I will unleash the might of the forces at my command. to ensure the safety of those I've been trusted to protect, right? The best defense is a good offense. And at that point, the Star-Spangled Banner starts playing, fireworks are going off, everybody's waving their bandanas, yeah, make America great again, yes, yes, okay? And then A238 replies, and this is legendary. This is Supreme Commander of A238, accompanied by our food, 2 beers, my dog, and a parakeet, which is now sleeping. I have no idea where we rank when compared to the other lighthouses in the Spanish Navy. You may keep your course if you wish. It will take a great deal of force to move the rocks you're about to be dashed against. Gotcha, right? To which the captain was like, dang it. Have you ever been in that situation where you're arguing with your wife and you're like, baby, no, I'm right. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Babe, I'm so sorry. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't really mean, all those things, shoot, I'm wrong, right? Ship captain was 100% certain he was correct, and that it was the other person's fault. He couldn't see his reflection in the mirror because he's a relational vampire. This is a big thing to understand in your life. Relational vampires really, really, really think that they're right. They do not wake up in the morning thinking, I'm Darkwing Duck, and I want to ruin your life, right? Remember that? Disney Afternoon? Tailspin, Baloo, Sea Duck? No? Nobody? Contra? Okay. Anybody in the 80s? Yeah, love that stuff, right? So they didn't wake up in the morning and want to ruin everyone else's life. They really think that everybody is trying to ruin their life. You could see it in the Pharisees' life too. They're so focused on what Jesus is doing that they can't see their own reflection in the mirror. That's an important thing to believe and understand. Like, they're not there to destroy you. They think they're protecting themselves. They won't listen. They won't change their perspective. They're unable to see their issues. And I totally relate to this. When you are a vampire, when I am a vampire, I feel like the victim, despite the fact that I am the victimizer. I mean, I'm leaving a trail of like collateral damage and relational hurt behind me, but I feel like everybody's out to get me. I've done this to my family. I've let myself get to this place where everything is everyone else's fault all the time. And I just start emotionally draining people around me. It's so draining. I can be such a vampire. Which brings me to my sub-thought here. Relational vampires have a tendency to feel like it's everyone else's fault. Have you ever noticed that? Like, that's where the vampiring really begins, is these people really believe that it's everybody else's fault. Now, let's pretend that this pie chart right here represents all the issues relationally in your life, okay? It's like a pie chart. I'd ask you, what percentage of this pie chart of the relational issues in your life represents your fault? You know what I mean? Your role in all the relationships. And I don't want you to tell me now, like, from a level-headed perspective. When you're arguing with your spouse, when you're arguing with your mother or your mother-in-law, what percent of the relational conflict in those conversations is your fault, and what percent is their fault? Because here's the thing. I think that relational vampires tend to overestimate other people's role while dramatically underestimating their personal role. That's just what they do. And according to the law of averages, I think most people are about, probably 50% responsible for the relational issues in their life. This is what it would average out to be. A really, really wonderful person, like my wife. She's like an angel that fell from heaven. Well, that would be the demons fell from heaven, so she's not that. But she's like an angel that, not by God's demand, but by her will, descent. She's great. Anyway, I'm sorry, honey. But the best people in the world, probably 40% responsible for their issues. The worst people, maybe 60% responsible. It's going to average out to about 50%. Relational vampires, I think, tend to be delusional when it comes to their role. I think relational vampires are like, I'm only a quarter responsible. That's it. It's mostly not my fault. It's mostly their fault. And I think so many of us, this is where we get, it's not really, I didn't really do that much. It's mostly, you're the instigator. Yeah, I made some mistakes. Everybody does. Nobody's perfect, but it's mostly your fault. If you wouldn't have, if you hadn't, and if you knew, and you don't understand where I came from and my background, I only live in the most prosperous country in human history during the most prosperous time in human history. You know what I mean? Where's my opportunity? The poorest Americans are 7 times richer than the average person in the world. Come on, I'm such a victim. My life is so hard. Don't you understand how difficult it is to have all this opportunity? There's a lot of choices for me to make, don't you understand how hard I had it? Forget that the average lifespan of a human being throughout human history is 30 years of squalor and pain. My life is just so hard, I understand. Here's the thing. This is how a lot of people feel. And if you feel this way, you're a little bit of a vampire. I know some of you are like, that is so, I am not a vampire. But before you get too offended, I want you to understand, I think many of us, including myself, have a tendency to become a little vampire-y, right? Craig Rochelle, one of my favorite pastors, he said a statistic the other day, said 80% of leaders would assess themselves to be in the top 10% of leadership. Oh, come on, right? Also, 80% of husbands would assess themselves to be in the top 10% of husbands. So, I mean, a correlation, I don't know, just kidding. But, no, it's amazing how radical our misperceptions of ourselves can be. It wouldn't seem like a big deal, but I think that this little pie chart right here is fundamental and key to understanding why relational vampires suck the life out of us. This circle unlocks a fundamental understanding of why vampires are so draining. If you zoned out, I want you to zone back in. This matters, okay? I think relational vampires are draining because they force others to take responsibility for what they themselves personally are responsible for. When you misappropriate your role in something, you're forcing someone else to take care of it. You're forcing someone else to do your homework, and that's draining. That's draining for both. It is a lot of work to manipulate somebody into doing your work and to manipulate yourself into believing that they should do it. And they feel bad, and you feel bad, and it's a lose-lose all around. When you think that something is only 25% your fault, when it's really 50%, you're going to drain everybody around you because you're forcing others to do more work than was fair for them to do, and you're also going to feel drained because they're like complaining about doing it. It's draining. This is why relational vampires are always frustrated and angry because they feel like no matter what, they can't get a fair shake, and everybody around them is like, yeah, also, they're draining and not fair. I think there's two reasons we do this, okay? There's a reason why men do it for the most part, and there's a reason why women do it for the most part, okay? And this isn't like 100% split down lines of gender, but I think for men at its core, it's just not wanting to do the work. And I know that sounds a little bit harsh, but we just don't want to do the work. We don't want to admit that we're wrong because it means that we have to change. You know what I mean? And changing is work. And sometimes we're just tired. You know, we're just dealing with it. And I know that sounds simple, but listen, my wife and I sometimes argue, you know, like probably on the daily. And I know that sounds bad, but listen, Kristen and I, we fight for our marriage. And I will admit, like, I know that I am not an easy person to be married to. But anyway, from time to time, our most common argument in the house, for sure, this is going to be shocking to you, but my tone of voice sounds a little harsh, right? And I'm like, why you got it? My tone of voice is fine. It's your tone of voice that's the problem. My tone of voice is fine, right? Now my tone of voice is bad because you accuse me of having a bad tone of voice. I mean, that's why, right? Now, I don't like admitting that I'm wrong. And the other day, true story, we argued about my tone of voice for like an hour. And I've been super busy recently. Like, I've been working a lot, gone every night, always. Like, it feels like 40 days straight. I've had night stuff that I've had to be at. So it's been really busy. And I'm wasting the time we have together arguing. And here's the thing. There's a little part of me that knows that I'm wrong, but I'm arguing anyway. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out why. Why am I doing this? Why am I subjecting both of us to this misery? Well, admitting that I'm wrong means that I have to change. And at the end of the day, I don't want to go through the work of changing. It means I have to control myself. And it wasn't pride. It wasn't anger. It was just, I don't want to have to change another thing about me. I'm tired. I'm tired of trying to change. It's just change is work. It's funny because all the women are like, that can't possibly be it. I mean, men can't be that simple. All the guys are like, yeah, no, that is actually, that's true, right? We do this with other arguments as well. Like in the house, sometimes it's coffee grounds. Get the coffee grounds off the counter. It's like, honey, it could have been the kids. You know, maybe they went in the garbage. Why you got to blame me for that? What if the kids made the coffee? Huh? What if the kids did? You just got to blame me for coffee grounds on the counter? How do you know I did it? Right? And again, it's just, for me as the man, it's not pride, it's not anger. I don't want to have to work to change. It's one of the big reasons I don't like admitting that I'm wrong. For others, especially women, it's a little different. I don't think it's about not admitting that you're wrong. It's not about not wanting to work. I think for women, it's fear, shame, and control. And fear, shame, and control is like this crazy cycle tornado that can really get spun up because you're afraid of who you might actually be. It's a fear of the unknown. It's a shame of that being exposed. What if people see who I really am? What if people see down there? And so what we need to do is we need to control the situation through manipulation and emotions and other things to prevent the unknown from being known, right? Fear, shame, and control. It spins around. Talk more about that in a minute, but I think because relational vampires can't see their reflection, they have a tendency to feel like it's everyone else's fault, and they force others to take responsibility for what they are personally responsible for. And we see this, 2019 is the most vampire age ever. You look at these university campuses, and we hear about these microaggressions, and you're responsible for my feelings, and I'm forcing you to manage what you say so that I don't ever feel threatened in safe spaces and all this stuff, right? That, at its core, is just relational vampiring. And here's the problem with that, is it's exhausting. Everybody feels drained. It's a lose for everybody. Everybody on all sides feel like they're losing. The vampires feel like they're losing. The people who are getting bit on the neck feel like they are also losing. So simple action step for you. Because here's the problem. If you're a relational vampire, you don't know that you are. You're still sitting here saying, this is about my spouse. Jesus, please let my husband hear this. Please, Jesus. Listen, if you can't see your reflection, you don't know this is you, but it's probably you, right? You're still finding reasons why it's not you. But listen, I have these simple exercises I want you to go through. I want you to ask somebody you respect and love in your life who's farther along than you, who isn't an extremist. Nobody on this far end of the spectrum, nobody on this far end of the spectrum. Just ask somebody you respect. 2 questions. Number 1, what area in my life do I shift responsibility? And number 2, what is one area I'm not seeing my own reflection? You know what? Those are really good questions. I've been going to all the life groups of our church, and I've been asking different versions of these questions, and I've been getting some really great answers. And listen, I was totally blind to it. I totally did not see it. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to have that feedback. Relational vampires can't see the reflection. They have a tendency to blame others. My second point is pretty simple. Much like real vampires, relational vampires don't like to walk in the light. The legend goes, if a vampire of lore walks into the sunlight, they will disintegrate because the sunlight kills them. Again, I'm not sure why, but that's just, what fiction says. Now, relational vampires actually also hate the light, but they hate a different kind of light. They hate the light of truth. 1 John 1:5 says, this is the message we heard from Jesus and now declare to you. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. So we're lying if we say we have fellowship with God, but we go on living in spiritual darkness. They're not participating in the truth. Listen, people who hate truth will do anything to avoid it. And I think relational vampires do this all the time. They would trust their feelings over facts. That's like fundamental relational vampiring 101. I trust my feelings in the moment more than the facts and reality of my existence. And listen, I trust immediate pleasure over future consequence. That's relational vampire thought process. And here's the problem with that. Okay, it used to be 100 years ago, if you made a mistake, you were one bad mistake away from starvation. You would starve. You screwed up, you'd starve. Today, our consequences, the consequences for our actions are really far removed from us. So if we make a mistake in life, it's not that big a deal. We're not really held that accountable. The problem is over the course of time, if we listen to our feelings to the detriment of the facts around us, and I'm not saying you can't listen to your feelings. I'm not saying that your feelings aren't important, but if your feelings supersede the reality, the brutal reality, however harsh it may be of our existence, it's going to lead us in bad places. A perfect example of this is the Pharisees in Jesus' life, okay? Remember those guys who were giving Jesus a hard time at the start? The problem with those guys is their feelings and their passions led them to think that they could overthrow the Roman government. And the problem with that is it ignored the fact that the Roman government was nearly infinitely more powerful than they were. And so they ignored the facts and the reality of their situation for a very long time. And ultimately, it resulted in the complete annihilation of the entire nation of Israel. And the Jews would experience some of the most brutal acts committed by the Roman Empire recorded in human history, right? Because they ignored facts. And today, I think we see this all the time. I think what happens is relational vampires will drag others into their darkness, and people eventually start to get hurt. At first they don't, but eventually after stumbling. In our aircraft carrier story, if the captain refused to admit that he was wrong, and he continued to walk in his own little darkness, refusing to see his reflection, refusing to see the light, eventually everyone would get hurt. And the task force would be dashed against the rocks. How many relational vampires do you know that have dragged you or their loved ones, or you've dragged people into your own little darkness, right? Your darkness of addiction, your darkness of financial management poorly, your darkness of lies, whatever it is. We just drag people into this place. And at first it feels fine. What's the big deal? I just don't want to walk in the light. I don't want to face the truth. But eventually it results in pain and suffering. I think so many people hate the light because of this fear, shame, and control issue, right? Fear of who we really are and the unknown that it may bring. A shame of others finding out and judging who we are. So what we do is we control the situation that we're in to avoid the light. Have you ever been to a family gathering? We're coming up on the holidays. And you got that one relative who makes everybody dance like marionette dolls. Like, we're a happy family, even though we hate each other. Like, everything's good. And it's like, this is obviously ridiculous. Obviously. But nobody wants to do anything because we're going to make this person have a conniption. And the reason why everybody dances around, because this person can't face the reality of their existence, right? Whomever that person is, they can't face the reality. So I think a lot of times relational vampires force, manipulate, bully, cajole, and control the people of their life to hold up these giant shades to block them from having to see the light. And you walk around them holding up these shades and doing this way and acting this way so that their life won't be exposed to them. That's what it's about. You're holding this facade up. And it feels needy, it feels frustrating, and it's not always what you think. I think a lot of times we think of relational vampires as a bully, as an attacker. A lot of times, I think the most common way to do it is through emotions. It's crying, it's manipulating, it's, if you do this, you always, and I never, and then because you hurt me, and because of the way, and because of the reasons, and because of that's the most common way to do it. right? You're responsible for my negative feelings, so you need to hold up this giant thing to keep me from having to see the light in my life in this way, right? So frustrating. And listen, I do this all the time with Kristen. Let me show you what happens, okay? Chris will come up to me, she'll confront me, she'll say, hey, John, you got this issue in your life. And I am like Neo in the Matrix. Remember that old movie? I'm like dodging bullets, like, ah, you know? And then I get out my gun and I'm like, boom, 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 I'll fire right back at you, right? What about this thing that you do and this thing that you do and this thing that you do? Because she fires at me, I'm like, oh, I'm going to turn this around on her. What am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? I'm avoiding the light, right? You try to shoot some light at me, oh, I want to avoid that. So I'm going to send it right back at you. We're going to turn this, right? That's what relational vampires do. Simple application. What is one area of my life that I refuse to face the truth in? I think this is so insightful because I think all of us in our lives, we have these little caves of darkness that we don't want to give to Jesus. We have these little areas of our life. We just don't want to go there. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to go there. We want to avoid it at all costs. And these are the little things that come and hurt people in our lives. These are the little things. This is, you know what? I don't want to talk about why I shut down whenever we go to this area. I don't want to talk about why I lose my temper. And for years, we just sucked the life out of everybody around us because we don't want to deal with this darkness. And then what is one area of my life I hate talking about? This is a big one for me, right? The other day, we had this trunk or treat event at church, and I'm so grateful for the volunteers. It was like the biggest one we've ever run, but I'm not going to lie to you, there are some areas we could have made it run smoother, right? And I knew it wasn't great, but what I wanted to do is shut my mind down and just go home and go on Facebook Marketplace and looked at like used long body GM vehicles that I don't need, and I already have 2 of them, but that's just what I wanted to do, right? And Kristen comes up to me and she's like, hey, we got to talk about these problems. And I was like, girl, I don't want to talk about that. And right there immediately, because this is a trigger in my mind, I knew that I was going to become a vampire. I was going to find reasons like, girl, you're always so hard on me and blah, blah, blah. I just got back from work and I just worked like 14 hours and can't you just give me a break? And we put on this event, blah, 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 right? Hold up the sunshade and keep me from seeing the light. And then I said, stop. Everybody stop. Right? Kristen, lay it on me, girl. Like, I can do it. I can handle it. I'm ready for the truth. Shine it on me, right? Where in your life do you hate talking about the truth? Right? I think for a lot of us it's finances. Right? You're in this horrible financial situation. Every time your partner comes to you, he's like, hey, we got these big problems. You're like, why you got to talk about that now, huh? What's the deal? Because we got bills now, huh? That's a problem. But no, you want to avoid it. You know, maybe it's a messed up relationship. Hey, you know, we haven't like connected in a year. You know, like what's the deal with that? Like we got to deal with something, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of us, we have these areas we avoid talking about. I think this is a really helpful question to realize, am I becoming a vampire in my life, right? Relational vampires hate walking in the light. And this results in my third point, which is painful but real. Because you can't see reflection, because you can't walk in the light, eventually relational vampires feel like they're not really alive. They're alive, but they're not really living. That's something I relate to. Now, the vampires of lore supposedly are not really alive, so they have to suck the lifeblood out of others to maintain a semblance of life. I think relational vampires are not really living. They're like walking dead. They're not really living life. And so they try to bite into all kinds of things looking for life. James 1, 14 and 15 talks a little bit about this. It says, temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. I think all of us in our life have experienced that. You know, God doesn't call sin because, you know, he wants us to miss out on fun. We know sociologically, statistically, that the things God calls sin leads to pain in our life, whether or not you're a Christian. You can be an atheist, and you know I'm right. And if you don't think I'm right, you're like, as a matter of fact, wrong, right? I think the issue for so many of us is that we're alive, but we don't feel like we're living. You know, something happened this last week. Not this last week. This last year I've been following it, but this last week the album dropped. Kanye West's album, Jesus is King, came out. And it's exciting to watch what God has been doing in that man's life. And I know some of you are like, well, let's wait and see, Pastor. Let's whatever, you know, what if? And I'm not saying elevate him to a position of leadership in the church, but I'm praying for him, right? Is this a place where we expect people to prove it, or is this a place where we give people the benefit of the doubt and we come just as we are without one plea? I hope you're praying and celebrating and hoping for that man. I don't think anybody's under more pressure in our country right now than Kanye West. Right? And I've been thrilled watching his interviews. That album is more Christian than like a Lauren Daigle album. And that thing is so Christian. That is a great, theologically sound album. It's 27 minutes of musical perfection as far as I'm concerned. Right? But here's the deal. He drops his album. And he goes on, the album promotional tour. And he does the airplane interview with James Corden. Right? The airplane karaoke thing. And that was awesome. He has his own iPod of choir in the airplane. 15 minutes into it, he's talking with James Corden, right? And there he is, my man, right? And he's talking with Corden, And he says, how do you know that, like, this is actually real? And Kanye looks at him, and what he said was theologically right on. He goes, apart from Christ, we're not really alive. We're walking dead. Spiritually, we're not alive. And in Christ, we wake up or we're brought to life. And I know that God has brought me to life. That's actually, spiritually, theologically, a really rich and deep statement. Before Christ, we are not alive spiritually. We're dead. It sounds harsh, but it's true. Relational vampires, when we're not alive, when we're really walking dead, what we try to do is we try to take life from things and people to fill the void. That's why we bite into all these things, and we bite into all kind of things. Some of us here, you bite into stuff. We bite into money, looking for life, thinking, well, if I just get this thing, if I reach this achievement, then I'll be complete. If I have this much, I'll feel secure. If I have this much, I'll stop worrying. If I reach this level, then I'll never want more. If I get into this tax bracket, then I'll be good. We bite into sex, saying, if he chose me over his wife, right? If somebody chose me, if I could have that much, if I could have her because she's cute, if I had that just once even, then I'd be satisfied. We bite into relationships. Oh, he's going to make me feel complete. She's going to make me feel respectable. I don't need much. I just need one best friend. If I just had one person I could depend on, if I just had whatever. We bite into achievements. If I reach this position, if I get this award or recognition, if I get this promotion, if I get this, deal, then I'm going to feel good. We bite into possessions. Oh, if I just had a new boat. If I just had that new kitchen. If I had this new game. If I had these new clothes and I was a little skinnier and better hair and new car, and if I had a bale of weed, if I had all this stuff, then I'd feel good. Then I'd feel alive. We bite into all this stuff. And here's the thing. Everybody here has vampired it up with at least one thing that I mentioned, right? And here's a problem with that. Just like real vampires, as a relational vampire, when you bite into something, it's just a fading glimpse. It's just a fading glimpse. It's just a so momentary glimpse of feeling alive, followed by a deeper hunger, a real disappointment, and a greater awareness that we're alive, but we're not really living. That's the one feeling I could say a relational vampire has. Guys, I've been a vampire. I know what it feels like. It's a feeling of living, but not really being alive. It's a feeling like you're missing out on the life that you're walking through. Because here's a simple truth. Apart from Christ, I think we're all relational vampires. We're not spiritually living yet. The emptiness we feel in this life can only come and be fulfilled through Jesus. And when we're biting into all these other things, when we're looking to these other people saying, you define me, you give me, you pour into me, we're just going to drain them. And we're going to be continually dissatisfied. I love Jesus. I've been a Christian for 19 years. Yet so often I find myself ignoring the life that Jesus gave to me and biting into other things, hoping that those other things are going to fill me. Just falling back into these old habits. And they never do. They never do. Question. This is a big one. What am I biting into, looking for life in? And I want you to give the Sunday school answer. I want you to get real. How are you allocating your time? How are you allocating your thoughts? Like, based on really the way that you're living your life, what are you biting into? Is it working? Is it working? Because I bet there's a lot of us, oh yeah, I love Jesus so much. Like we say all this stuff, but we're biting into all these other things, and we feel empty. We're alive, but we're not really living. It's an issue. We're vampires, right? Relational vampires can't see their reflection, so they force others to take responsibility. They don't want to do the work, fear, shame, and control, whatever it is. They hide from the light to keep from having to confront the truth. Oh, hold this up. Don't put me in the light. Don't force me to face the truth. And they're not really alive. So they're looking for life from others because they're alive, but they're not really living. Jesus is the only true source of life and the only hope for relational vampires. One of my favorite parts of the whole Bible, Jesus' closest friend, his name's John. He wrote this book of the story of Jesus' life. And Jesus at one point early in his ministry, in John chapter 3, has this relational vampire, this Pharisee named Nicodemus, come to him. And Nicodemus was rich and famous and influential. Like all other relational vampires, he put up this big front, but he felt empty and broken inside. He'd been into a lot of things. He was alive, but he wasn't really living. And he comes to Jesus at night because he didn't want other people to know he didn't have the answers. He comes to Jesus at night, and he says, Jesus, what must I do to be saved? Jesus says, I tell you the truth, unless you are born again, you can't be saved. Nicodemus looks at Jesus and goes, what do you mean born again? I've been born. How can a man get born again when he's old? And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, you were born out of your mother's body, but you got to be born again spiritually. There's a spiritual birth that hasn't taken place. It must take place. You're walking dead. And it culminates in Nicodemus being like, okay, Jesus, how do I get born again? In the most famous verse in the whole Bible, The verse of Tim Tebow, John 3:16, is right here. It says, "For this is how God loved the world," Jesus says. You want to get born again? You got to do it this way. He gave his one and only Son so that everyone who believes in him, and this word believe is misinterpreted, okay? We don't have a cognate for it in English. The way that it's being stated here, it's talking about a conviction so deep, a belief so deep, it results in the alignment of every area of our life behind it. Right? It's not just, oh yeah, I believe in that. No. It is a belief so deep, so complete, that permeates every area of our life, that we really change our life behind it, right? Everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. Because God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus says, Nicodemus, I get you. I see you. I mean, you're biting into all of this stuff in life. But I could give you a life that'll fill you forever. Instead of being a life taker, a life sucker, a vampire, you'll become a donor, a giver, a bringer to everyone around you. Instead of needing to take from people, instead of needing to bite into things, you'll be an overflower. You'll be a giver. And have you ever met someone like that? You know, it's interesting because I feel like, especially today in America, we meet a lot of takers. We meet a lot of people who want something from us. But all of a sudden, you meet a few people who actually are able to give too. You know what I'm talking about? Those radiant souls. They have something inside of them to give to others. Some of you have experienced it. You've seen Jesus bring you from death to life, and there's something, some of you have friends you're sitting next to, and you've watched God change them, and they were takers, and they wanted something, but all of a sudden, God has begun to bring this birth up from inside of them, this spiritual rebirth that Jesus is talking to Nicodemus about, and it's different. I mean, it's been so interesting to watch Kanye's transformation this last year. I remember in 2003, college dropout. That album hits, and it was, I would call it a pioneering musical masterpiece. Like, it was great. And he continues to, I would say, be the most influential artist of the 21st century as far as pioneering new beats and new ideas in the genre. And his critically acclaimed album, probably the highlight of his career, was Life of Pablo, right? And I mean, this guy, at this point in his career, has access to everything. He's married to Kim Kardashian. He literally, actually had gold toilets. I mean, he has bit into everything in life, right? And during Life of the Pablo tour, he has a complete breakdown, right? Total breakdown, has to shut down the tour. Jay-Z, I know you got killers. Call me, bro, right? That's what he says. And then he goes into the mental institution. He has a big breakdown. And he feels like even though he has everything, he has nothing. Isn't that amazing? Like, we all want to be him. Oh, I wish I had that influence. Oh, I wish I had that stuff. But Kanye and many others like him will tell you, hey, I had it all. I bit into everything. And there's no more life there than there is where you're at. And then today, I mean, you see him in these interviews. And it's all about Jesus. I mean, for the first time, it's not about Kanye. It is about Jesus. Always, every moment, every opportunity he has. Watching him on Jimmy Kimmel, turning the conversation to Jesus, preaching the gospel about Jesus. His Sunday morning services. Oh, man, it's all about Jesus. It's about Jesus. And you just see someone who was empty, who bit into everything and was empty. And all of a sudden, you see someone who's full of zeal, direction, purpose, peace, and life. Radiates life. And listen, I'm praying for him. I hope and believe that he's going to make it. I hope you're praying for him too. But that's not because of Kanye. That's because of Jesus. Here's the thing. I think so many of us, we're biting into so many things. And I think there's a lot of us who feel like we're surrounded by vampires. Before I talk about how to deal with the vampires around us, we got to deal with the vampires inside of us. We got to deal with the issues in our own life. And I think there's a lot of us here today. You came excited. You're like, oh, man, please make sure that this person in my life is listening. Like, I can't wait to just, post this and hope that maybe they like it. Maybe they watch it. Like, I hope that they really see it because they're killing me, man. They be draining me, right? But listen. This isn't about them today. This is about you. This is about you. This is about you. Because I bet there's some of us here today. I mean, God ordained it before time began. He called you to this room because you're alive, but you're not really living. Because you bit into so many stuff. I mean, we have good lives, but we're not really living. A lot of people ask me, well, if I've already gone all in with Jesus, can I still be a relational vampire? I mean, I kind of sometimes feel like that. Listen, I think in Christ we should be less and less of a vampire every day. Like, that old nature is passing out of us. But I think, at least for me, the tendency is to fall back into it sometimes, especially in the winter season. What I do is I just put the new life of Christ that's in me, and I silence it. I mute it. And even though Jesus, the source of life, the author and perfecter of everything we see, is in me, I shut it down and I start biting into my old habits. I start biting into these old unfulfilling things. And when this happens for me, you know what happens? I just start seeing it as everyone else's fault in my life. You know how that feels. Everybody's out to get me. Why is it? Nothing's going right. Everybody's out to get me. Instead of counting my blessings, I'm counting my curses, right? I can't see my reflection. Then what happens is Kristen or somebody I love and respect will come and confront me. And this is what always happens. Is I'll be like, get out of my life. I don't want to see the light. I don't want to hear it, right? I push wisdom out of my life. I stop seeing my reflection. I push wisdom out of my life. And the end result of all that is I feel like I'm alive, but I'm not really living. Right? That feeling of emptiness begins to return. Isn't it funny that Jesus Christ has brought wholeness and fullness into me, and yet somehow the incredible, immutable power of God is somehow muted in my life? Like, what am I doing? But it's what I do. Relational vampires. Today, this is about us. Before I go into next week, before I talk about next week, before we have that conversation, I just want you to think about, is this me? Like maybe the reason I thought I needed this message so much is because I can't see my reflection. Because I'm biting into all these things and I'm looking for life. And look, maybe you got people in your life God's calling you to help, but it begins with dealing with the vampire inside of us. Are you missing out on feeling alive? Are you biting into things, hoping for more, but feeling less? Do you feel let down by almost everyone around you? Lean into Jesus. And I know how you feel. This isn't just about you today. It's about me. Like, I struggle with this, and I pastor this church. Lean into Jesus because he fills a void in our hearts with living water. You know, the Bible actually, it teaches us that we're born with this problem called sin in our life. And like I said, sin isn't God's anger against you. Sin is our decision to rebel against God's best for our life. And sin does. It brings death. It brings death. It brings dissatisfaction. It brings decay into our life. The Bible teaches us when you ask Jesus to forgive your sins and lead your life, you're inviting his living water to remove that death from you. For him to take that away, for him to get dirty himself so that we could be clean. And then what you do is you invite his spirit in the void that was previously filled by sin, it is filled by his spirit. And all of a sudden, like God changes you. He brings you from death to life spiritually. That's where Christianity begins. It doesn't begin with being a good person. It begins with inviting Jesus to forgive you, to cleanse you, and to fill you with his spirit. And again, I know that sounds crazy, but you've seen that happen to people. You've watched people be transformed. And I just wonder if it's time for some of us today to receive that same transformation and rebirth. Just in a moment of authenticity as we close, I just want to ask heads to bow and eyes to close, and I just want you to meditate about your life. In a moment of privacy and concentration, I want you to think about where you're at. Is this about you today? Are you living but not really alive? I believe that there's a lot of us here today who are dealing with that very issue, and I want you to know that Jesus came from heaven to earth to make a way for you to be reborn spiritually. And he's calling some of you to do that right now. If that's you, I'd like to help lead you through that process today. If that's you and you mean business with Jesus, would you lift up your hand right now and say, Pastor, that's me. I want that. I see that hand back there. I see that hand. I see that hand. I see that hand. I see lots of hands. I see you. I see you. I see you up there. I see you. I see you. I see you over there. I just ask you to pray in your heart with me. Lord Jesus, I ask you to forgive my sins. I ask you to remove the vampire and the death from me. Lord, forgive me for seeking life from all these things that aren't you. And today, I just choose to receive life from you alone. I receive your definition of me and your purpose for me. From this day forward, I choose to live my life for you alone. Thank you for forgiving me. I make you my leader. From this day forward, my life is not my own. It's yours, Jesus. It's in your name, I pray. All God's people said amen and amen. Can we give a round of applause for a dozen or more people who chose to follow Jesus? That's cool. I want to ask you guys to stand. The band is going to lead us in one more great song. Let's sing this together.